mix coming and going. And so I'm Tracy Russo, Senior Online Designer here. I've been at EIO for 3 years. And again, lots of varied education experiences before that, including Grand Valley and NMC, as well as classroom teaching. So I'm really excited to start today's session because it is really one of my favorite topics, which is assessment. We just go around and anybody can introduce in whatever order.
Sure, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Benjamin Ponifract. I've been working here at Ferris for about a year and some change now. I'm an assistant professor in the pharmacy practice department. I teach various clinical infectious diseases, mainly topics, and I also work at a hospital in Spectrum, Grand Rapids, where I'm currently calling in from. So nice to meet everyone.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Laura Sorg. I'm from the School of Nursing and I work as an adjunct.
Hi, I'm Ann Breitenwisher, and I'm a research and instruction librarian.
Hi, I'm Sharon George from the College of Business, and I'm Director of Student Academic Affairs.
Hi, I'm Kevin Brennan. I'm at KCAD in the Medical Illustration Department. I was hired last semester and took on the role as program chair, so it's been a little crazy.
I'm Dan Campbell, technologist at the eLearning department. Been here just under 10 years. Welcome again, everyone.
Yes, welcome everyone. Yes, Benjamin, I didn't realize you worked with infectious and chronic diseases. You had mentioned, College of Pharmacy, but I guess I didn't realize it had some of those subsets, not being familiar with that discipline. So I can only imagine how crazy it might be for you right now.
Yeah, it's pretty intense. I haven't been too involved with leading everything going on with COVID, but I've definitely volunteered for a lot of our COVID swabbing kinds of things where we need, faculty members to advise the students and stuff. So yeah, it's been good.
Yeah, well, we're definitely glad you're here and glad you joined us. I am going to go ahead and share my screen. Let me set it up on ahead of time. There we go. And again, at any time, blurt out, just ask a question with our small group, or feel free to use the chat. It's very helpful when Dan and I present together, or, when you're presenting at any time, if you have students that you can ask to do that monitoring the chat skill for you, it is a really nice thing to have someone else as your backup, just in case anything ever happens. So I did just want to start with, our session, and as the other days, I always just like to start something with some type of tangible metaphor or analogy or something. And so for today with assessment, I really think of it in terms of chutes and ladders game. So this was just one of those old pictures of the snakes game that originated, but we're going to cover, and I have examples with hot links in every one of the slides. So I will share the presentation, so you have access to all the links and all the resources, which will go to a lot of tutorials, because assessment is such a giant part of what we do as teachers. And you can see, even this list of subtopics is longer than on the other days. So again, ask any questions as they come along, share ideas and examples, because each one of you is also an expert in your own experiences in areas where you might want to either share something or ask something how it might apply to your different area. And I think this is the biggest thing. Just that starting point is just, why do we actually do it? One of the things that education is famous for is collecting data and not using it. K-12 in particular in Michigan, it's really a joke if you think about it, because when we test people for whether or not they've mastered everything from the year, it's not even made available to the teachers to make any adjustments until the following year, at which point the student was already promoted. So that's a typical gap. In higher ed, it's also common, just because higher ed faculty, whether you're adjunct or faculty, you're the subject area expert in your subject. So a lot of times the ins and outs of using assessment might not be in your background. Just like, again, pharmacy is not in my background either. So we really there's two main types of assessment, and there's, again, you can go in a million different tangents. I'm just trying to stay at the high level, but so for overall, we talk about assessment typically in terms of formative assessment or summative assessment. And the reason we do the formative assessment is we either want to adjust our pacing speed. So either we're going too fast for our students, maybe we need to slow down, or sometimes we find out that actually we're going too slow and we bore them and we need to speed up, or maybe it's just right. We also might need to adjust our teaching methods. You know, if we give a self-assessment or any type of assessment and we find out that, you know, half the class does poorly on it, what does that mean? You know, so that's where as teachers, we can look in, you know, the Canvas analytics, and our department can work with you to figure out what's going on so that you know whether it is something that maybe you need to adjust your teaching style for something, or maybe it's just a factor outside of your control and we need to look more deeply. Summative assessment is the one that's typically confused with evaluation. And an evaluation, typically, when you're making an evaluation, that's just like a statement of fact. When you are doing, you know, the purpose of summative assessment is really to look at that level of mastery in order to help students again. Do they stay where they are? Do they have to retake a course? Do they get to move forward? It's really, you know, creating that assessment piece of their performance. What level are they at? So it's typically when we're planning our assessments, you know, we start with some of these essential questions of teaching and learning. And, you know, again, these questions, it doesn't matter what discipline you are, you know, teaching, or even what decade you're teaching in. These questions have been around for a couple hundred years, at least that I'm aware of in curriculum theory. And we can apply these to our teaching, just like, you know, I use the image of the puzzle here because it kind of is that puzzle. And you as the content expert are the one piece who is in control of making sure that match. Our department can absolutely help you figure out the mechanics of how you structure your assessment, and we can help you with the alignment of the assessment. But it starts with what do students need to know and be able to do in your discipline and career field. So making sure that that picture, you know, it's usually in your outcomes and in the course description, but a lot of times that's not sufficient. But that is where your personal expertise comes into play. And then the second one is how will I and how will the students know whether or not they actually can do this or not? And that's that aligning your assessment to the type of verb that's in your outcome and the type of whatever it is that they need to do outside of the classroom. Typically, this is where there's a huge gap a lot of times because, especially in online, many times it's easier to give like a multiple choice exam, but the reality is most careers don't use those on a daily basis as what you do for a living. Most careers involve a whole lot more critical thinking and actually doing things. And then the third question as we go along, and I'll have examples and different bits and pieces along the way, is when we're creating our assessment, what do we have in place for students who need more? If they don't understand it, how are we going to help them? And having that plan ahead of time is going to make teaching your class much more enjoyable for you, but much more effective for your students. So, you know, one of the practical examples, and I've got these throughout this presentation that I put in here, is this is actually something that I worked with Mike Rieger in public health, but this is a common problem that we have in teaching. What we would do with a career in real life, we can't access that in whether it's the online environment or even the face-to-face environment. So one of the quickest, easiest ways to get around the fact that we just can't do that in real life in the classroom is through role play and simulation. And these are very fun things to create, but they're also commonly used in every single discipline across the board. So like in the one that we did, and this was one that Mike Rieger and I did actually in 2018 in helping his chronic students studying the chronic epidemiology make decisions about what would they do with an outbreak. And we just set this up with the directions and then a discussion board on the different policies that the daycare center should use to give them kind of a taste of why they needed to learn things. Another type of example of using assessment and connecting it to the real world, but also using technology and a little bit of creativity to make it more applicable to students. This is from a criminal justice class. And I bring this up because a lot of times we hear from faculty, the students don't do the reading. You know, I put the chapters out there, I tell them they need to read it, but then they take their test or they write their paper and I can tell they didn't do the reading. It's a very common, not just at fairs, that's kind of a universal thing. And when I was a student, I can tell you, if I could get away without doing the reading, I would have also. And then another piece with this, in some classes, you have students where they think they know it. They don't think they need the textbook because, oh, they were doing it, and you're looking at them and you're thinking, you know, oh, no, you don't know it. So we used Canvas quizzes, and we did something very simple because, you know, in this case, again, it was a criminal justice class, but you could adapt the strategies. It was a simple question that they had to decide, and it referenced stuff in the textbook that involved, you know, knowing the content and the quick decision making, which is what you would do in the field. You have to know sometimes, you might have to know like the policy, the process, whatever, and you hear a bit of information, make a decision. So we manipulated the amount of time that they could take on that quiz to help them understand that for most of them, they don't know offhand the exact right thing to do in the heat of the moment. And then it was followed up at the end of the week-long unit with a post-assessment. And the post-assessment, you know, again, similar thing where they watched a scenario and they had to make a decision based on the policy and practice of the time. And we added another level in that, which is, again, something often more applicable in the real world, to help them bring the value of their performance related to the group. So we added it in terms of everybody took the quiz individually, but because a bad decision, just like whether it's a hospital or a school system or a police department, you know, or whatever, one person's behavior can affect everybody. So everybody had to get it right. And there were some other structures in there to help them with the peer implementing, you know, of this. It wasn't just like, you know, sink or swim, but again, it was building in that pre and post assessment, and all of it was done with technology. So it was designed ahead of time, and it was automatically scored. So once it was in place, the students could also take it multiple times and use it that way. And it took away from the, you know, that time load on the instructor. Feedback tools. This is a huge area in assessment, and it's one area in which using technology can absolutely shine. Because again, we've, you know, mentioned briefly off and on how exhausting getting all the grading done can be. And there are some ways that we can use technology and, you know, ahead of time planning to make that load not only easier on us, but actually more effective for students so that their performance is better. Because again, we want our students to succeed because at some point in time, they're going to be our peer in the field. So just some tips on feedback, and then I'm going to give some different examples. Feedback, you always want to make sure it's actionable and specific. And I put some ideas. So again, exemplars, you know, creating exemplars and non-exemplars. Sometimes creating that non-exemplar is a great way to help students understand what it doesn't look like. And especially in cases where maybe you can't even put it in words. What does good bedside manner look like? It can be sometimes harder to describe than what it's not. You know, good customer service, the same kind of ways, because there's so many varieties of what the good stuff looks like, but it's pretty clear sometimes what it's not. You can use, so creating the exemplars, Canvas Studio makes great screencasts. There are other tools as well. You can also use Rubrics, and that's another great time saver. And I put that in this area with the caveat. The one thing with the rubrics is they do let students know typically the specific things that they did right or wrong. However, they often stop short about letting them know what to do about it. And that actionable, what can they do about it, is especially critical for any non-traditional student, any student who might be from, like, for example, Native American populations or other populations where it's likely not only in their family of origin, but in their community, there may not be a lot of people who can have a conversation of, for example, about APA formatting. You know, if you say their APA formatting is wrong and just mark it wrong, but they don't know how to fix it or don't get the resources, it's not going to improve their performance. Some of the other ways to do it, if you've got, you know, need to give actionable and specific feedback on larger assignments, again, I always recommend using things like the announcement, sending out a weekly wrap up where you state, you know, the things that you noticed as a whole. You know, most of the people on this did this wonderfully, and make sure that you let them know what did most people do right, what did most people do wrong, and that way You only have to give individual feedback for some of the, more specific or individualized. You don't need to do it for everybody. And those discussion boards are, again, a great way to do that as well. So everybody gets to see the feedback, and they can also compare and contrast how they did with other people. Also, even based on when you wrap up and do kind of a consensus, like, again, I see that, these people pulled these great things out of the readings and they connected it to what's happening in the news. Fabulous job. You may want to fact check. Again, it gives you a quick opportunity. The short, low stakes quizzes, they have automatic feedback capability with the quizzes. Again, why spend time worrying about whether or not they did the quizzes? You can make that, kind of self-paced, just a 5-question quiz where you can even randomize it, all kinds of things. And then you don't have to think about it again. And they can just be simple factual questions from the text, but at least it lets the student know that they have paid attention to some of the important things. And it also, one of the best things about using just those short, quick quizzes, again, only a few questions, 5 to 10 questions, small amount of points, it rewards those students who show up and do the work, which is what we want. We want people to just methodically be responsible. In smaller chunks, better for you, better for them. Again, you always want to make sure that you don't make it so high stakes that when they fail, it's overwhelming. They need to have time and the ability to, fix what's going on. I put this in here. It's one of the pages, so here's the link. So you'll have that in the presentation. But when you're thinking, oh, I just want to know how to do this and some of these things, in these Keep Teaching resources, this is one of the pages on assessing online, and it has all kinds of specific tools. It has links to examples. All these links either go to the specific tutorial or a specific example that you can use, to see exactly how to do these things, even how to use the rubric, going through SpeedGrader. So I want to make sure that everybody knows that these resources are there 24/7 for any time you want to go back and look at these. Another thing related to assessment and, as a whole is that efficacy. Can students feel confident that they can do it? Do they feel like they know what they need to do to get it done? Again, this is especially for newer students and sometimes even for high achieving students. They don't know. It's kind of the heart of the just tell me what I need to do to get an A, except, of course, we don't just want to give them the answers. We want to teach them critical thinking. But there are some definite things that you can do that are going to help them. And that's where I think a lot of times that transition for people who have taught face-to-face versus going online, if you're not careful, this part gets lost. When we say make your thinking explicit, what we're talking about is kind of that the stuff that goes on in your head about the making decisions that you, as the expert in that subject area, you don't even a lot of times think about all the things that go into it, but yet someone new to that content might not realize, all what's going on. So face to face, a lot of times it's easier because they're seeing you, it's like working a math problem. They're seeing you work the math problem or the calculation, and they can stop at different points in the calculation and ask questions about where something came from. It's the same even for, writing or explaining your decisions, where making your thinking explicit, you want to, talk out loud, talk about the process, because you are an expert thinker and you have, in order to become that expert, you have a certain way of thinking that you do. And so some of the practical ways you can do that, there's 2 parts to this. One part is the instructor focus. You can go ahead and use screen capture tools or Zoom, capture your thinking. Even things like, the reason I chose this reading for this week is because it's an example of, and fill in the blank, whatever about your content. So you can, share that, or even, about what makes a good assignment or a good decision. But your students, the same thing. They have access to Canvas Studio. A lot of them, they're using their phones. They make videos all the time, TikTok and all these things that are just way fun, but they can be used for learning. But the students can tell you their thinking too. You can ask a multiple choice use multiple choice for the bulk of the learning. So again, automatic grading cuts down for you, but then have a question where they just have to tell you in 1 minute or less, 2 minutes or less, how did they come to that conclusion? What material did they use to make those decisions? And that is how you know, oh, did they just get lucky? Did they just, memorize it? Or do they actually know how to think like an expert in that subject? Video and audio is a great resource for that efficacy. And if you make it short, again, they can see if other people are doing it, they can see how you did it, and they can feel more confident. Those self-assessments as well also lend very well to efficacy, because again, the more that they can take it, sometimes having practice quizzes and allowing them multiple times to take something until they get it correct, that helps them build that sense of mastery. Gary Huey, in one of his courses, Absolute Riot, he had a student who had a traumatic brain injury at one point in time in their life. And Gary's multiple choice quizzes were set up so you could take them as many times as you wanted. How many times do you think a student might have, what do you think is the most times that a student might have taken a quiz just to get all the points? You can either put it in the chat or just popcorn out. What do you think? What's the highest number that you've ever had somebody take a quiz? And we're talking just a 10-point quiz, not like a final exam here, to get all the points. Benjamin says 25. You going higher or lower? What do you think? Any other guesses? Pretty much, yes. Price is Right rules. Oh, Dan's got that down, Pat. Ann or Sharon, you want to make a guess? Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and let you know it is 80. He took it 80 sometimes. It was so, he saw that and he came, that's why I know about it, because he's like, am I seeing something wrong? What happened here? And he ended up contacting, oh, now Sharon comes in, so she's the winner. And because she was on the different device, we might even have to give her credit for that, but I don't know. But yeah, 80 times just to get those points. And Gary asked him why. And he said he really wanted to know. So again, that helps people, but absolutely those practice exams ahead of time using the same format, it's always just a stress relief when you can do that. It definitely helps build efficacy in the thinking so they know what you're talking about. Another great assessment tool in a lot of ways that, again, what we want to know and what they need to know is, are they going to be able to do anything in life besides take a multiple choice test, is using video and audio. This is a group project that I had some of my students do when I was, these were graduate students when I was at GVSU, and I wanted them to be able to use multimedia and use audio. And I also wanted them to talk about what makes a good teacher. So you can actually click on these and you can find them entertaining if you want when I send that presentation link. But they had to interview people, and none of them live in the same area. So this was done completely remotely, and they used a free program called Audacity, and they created from the interview, they had to boil it down and create little audio podcasts. Again, because the ability to create an audio podcast and to edit is something that's critical for these instructional design students to be able to do. So the reason I do group projects is because, going back to what makes an assessment meaningful, in almost every single career, almost every single job, you need to work with other people in order to get stuff done. A lot of people say, I don't like to do group work because, some people do more, some people do less. Well, we all agree probably with that. Oh, thank you, Dan, for putting the link to Audacity in there. And a lot of times that can be true, but the reality is that's also a lot of times true in the workplace, where there's always, the 80-20 or 90-10 rule, where people joke about, but it can be true. And so putting in group work, but again, it does multiple things with that assessment process, going back to all the good things about assessment. In a group project, when it's constructed well, and on that slide at the bottom where it has scaffolding, group work, example directions, I have some specific examples and guidance, and we can definitely help you break it down. in your own work, but it causes, them talking peer to peer. So again, it brings back that vicarious learning where they're learning from each other, or assessing each other, talking about the content. And it also streamlines things for you as instructor as well, because then you've got one project to grade instead of 5 individual papers, for example. So it does a lot of great things with assessment. And again, using video and audio, we are happy to help anyone with that. As Ann said, there's room in the library that's set up even for mixed teams where, maybe half their group is somewhere far away and part of the group is there. The area is big enough they can distance and all those good things. So in there, we've got some different resources, on doing that type of group work. Again, just building in those connections and building in all the different ways of assessment, and then having them view each other's, like in this one, when my students reviewed each other's in a discussion forum before we put this collaborative slide, it also helps them see what other people come up with. So there's a self-assessment level embedded as well, along with the group work. Peer review, that's a huge area also. And that one, I don't know if anyone has a story that they'd like to share about either a great example of peer review that worked really well, or about an example of peer review that did not go well. And then I have a couple bits of advice depending on what comes out. I don't know, again, if anyone would like to take a minute to share something they've either experienced with using peer review.
So I've personally never used any peer review, but I guess one of the reasons why that is because I oftentimes would think students wouldn't know how to give really good feedback because they're also learning how to do the same exact thing at the time. And so I guess that's really my only comment on peer review, and I've never done it, so I could be completely wrong.
Anyone else want to add to what Benjamin said?
I've been wanting to use them for critique, but just haven't spent the time to figure out exactly how they work.
Hi, this is Laura, and I've used peer review as somewhat of a brainstorming activities. So for example, if there's a big project, a big paper, that if the group gets together and looks at the student's first draft and offer suggestions on content that they could add or references, I think it helps everybody.
Yeah, those are excellent points. And Benjamin, actually, you started with one of the main things I did want to make sure that we brought out of this. That ability to give and receive that constructive feedback, or peer feedback, that is huge. And you're absolutely right when you're thinking that if students are learning something, that you don't want to set them up to be a failure and either, giving someone the wrong advice when they don't know what they're doing themselves, or, to be receiving advice, maybe I do know what I'm doing, but Dan gives me criticism and, it's the wrong thing. And so I change my good answer to the wrong answer. And I think all of us in our own lives maybe have had experiences like that where it didn't go well. One of the key things in doing peer review is to think of it in terms of what are things that the students know perhaps from an earlier class, or perhaps it's just something that's not as important to the new skill, but it's important to do for quality control, and have the peer review act as that part. So for example, in this example that I show here, that was an example actually of an epidemiology class where they had, that huge textbook where you have to read all those chapters and you have to have kind of a working knowledge of it, but yet it's such a monster to go through. The other class that comes to mind that I have flashbacks to that same kind of experience is statistics with our 700-page statistics book. And you're right, when someone's learning the new thing, they can't give great feedback, but what they can give, like in this case, we had it set up in a discussion board where they first, each group had picked a chapter, and so they created a public service announcement about the chapter, but the peer review was not about whether or not the content was effective in what he was teaching for the new things, but what they did do was they fact checked. So they went through the public service announcement and made sure that if there was a textbook reference and any kind of facts that were listed as facts, that that was done properly, that it was cited accurately, you know, those types of things, grammar, usage, APA. So you can use peer review for a lot of that. Like Laura said also, the early on in the brainstorming, you know, the students might not know the deeper level of, you know, whether their topic's going to end up working out well, but they can look at the face value when you're starting that first draft. You know, does it seem like it's going to be a good topic? Does it appear to meet that? So when you're doing those peer reviews, keeping on that level of, you know, things that students already know how to do or feel comfortable with, and not putting them in that situation. And then you do get a much more effective result from your peer review. I have not used, there is a tool in Canvas, and I don't know if Dan wants to speak to that, but there is a tool in Canvas that does peer review specifically, so you can set that up for your assignments. That's not a tool that I've used because I have not taught in Canvas this semester or last semester, but it is one we do have a number of people that have found it very helpful to use.
Yeah, I can say just a few words on it. It's when you say assignments, that in this context means a very specific thing. It's the item type that Canvas calls an assignment. So it doesn't work for discussions or quizzes, but if you've got a paper, a lab report, anything that is a document the student is submitting, you'd have it as an assignment. Peer reviews can be set up as part of that, or via a discussion board exchange, like is kind of outlined here. If you choose to use it, it can be very effective. The biggest challenge I've seen is students not knowing that they've been given this thing to do, because it doesn't appear in a super obvious place like a normal assignment would. They're just kind of notified of it off to the side, but you will know about it, and you can tell them about it and where to look for it and what they need to do. So once they find it and click in, it's pretty straightforward, and the result is similar to what you would see in the speed grader. They'll have the same tools as far as, you know, the side panel where they can give general feedback. I think they'll also have the ability to do inline comments, the point annotation tool that you might be familiar with. So in that way, they can, you know, point to particular parts of the paper and say, you know, this is great, or, you know, check your source here, or this is cited improperly, or whatever it might be. So it's just another round of that before, you know, they might submit a final version, or, you know, and like Tracy's explained, peer reviews can have many purposes.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing I like about that peer review, and like how Dan's sharing how that the actual tool works, is it doesn't just let me know, you know, how the original assignment works. It lets me know, does the student know what good, you know, good work looks like in someone else? Because it does, even the person doing the reviewer, it tells you as much about the person doing the review as it does about the person being reviewed. And again, in many careers, that ability to give and get feedback is something that we do on a daily basis. This is another way that we use peer feedback. This is a different criminal justice class, but we used this as the discussion board, you know, as a way to kind of make the peer review process work, so that they also could have the benefit of seeing all the different, you know, cover letters and things when they were working on their job resumes, but it was done still within that discussion forum, and they were given criteria. So you can see they had to, you know, I had the directions, but there were two different roles that they took and went through the different steps in order to do the peer review. And in this, one of the other things that happens a lot of times with peer review is we hear things like, well, my partner didn't get it to me until whatever time, and so I couldn't get it done, and it's the other person's fault, or no one reviewed mine, you know, I submitted it, but no one reviewed mine. And so using a discussion board, some of the other types of things that you can use to structure it to prevent that is it kind of was like on a, almost like a push-pull, first come, first serve type of thing. So you posted your, your first draft of your cover letter, and then the person reviewing just picked the next one in line. So it went basically in line one after another as far as who was doing the reviewing and who was getting it. Again, kind of like if you go to, well, Secretary of State, so when it pops into mind, you pick a number and the next one is who gets it. It's not about whichever person, it's just about next in line. And so that's, again, using that discussion board, you can make that happen. And if you wanted to make that happen within smaller groups, some of you do teach very large sections, so you wouldn't necessarily want that with 100 students, but you could still have smaller groups of, say, 10 to 15 within your larger class, so that the students are only seeing, a mid-sized group. So there's enough people there to make sure there's a workflow, but not too many, so that the students get overwhelmed. One of the last topics that we're going to talk about today is just that topic of rubric. And this slide, again, you'll have the link at the top is a hot link. This goes to that faculty guide that came out in the beginning of fall semester. And that faculty guide has, like, the first 10 slides are specifically different Ferris faculty sharing different teaching strategies that are going to, that are helpful to be used in the classroom, and shared with their name, so that if you have a question about it or want to talk to someone who maybe uses the strategy you're interested in, you can contact that faculty member directly. And then this is one that I wanted to share just on the rubric, because the rubrics, using the rubrics feature in Canvas, and the how-to directions are in that other slide that I shared earlier. So again, it's all in here with the tutorials and how to use it. But the rubrics are a great tool in Canvas for many reasons. One of the biggest reasons is that clear criteria. It helps students know exactly what you expect of them. Now, if it's a small assignment, like discussion board weekly posts, a lot of people just use very simple rubrics. Maybe it's only a few points, because all it is, your response reflected concepts from the reading. Your response included, or your response made a connection between your experience and the reading. They can be very simple, or they can also be very lengthy. When you get this slide, if you click on that rubric, it will go to the full rubric, but I wanted to show just a few other bits and pieces about this rubric. This is what the rubric looks like when you're creating it in Canvas. A difference between Canvas and those of you who may have done rubrics in Blackboard are, well, there's a lot of differences, but one of the main differences that I like is that for each one of your criteria rows, you can control inside the number of ratings. So you can have, say, your first criteria, you only have 3 levels like shown here: high, mid, and low. You can have another criterion row that maybe has 5 levels, and Canvas allows you to do that. So, it's not always best to do that, but you have a lot of freedom on how you construct both your criterion, the structure, and then the levels within that. Another best practice that this particular rubric shows, if you look at it, he starts with high, kind of in the far left. That's also one of the best practices, because when we are reading English as English speakers, we read left to right. So what you really want to do is you want to have your students from the get-go, you want them to read what excellent is, not starting out to read what's the minimum. Because think of it in terms of building up. If you tell me I only need to get 3 out of 5 to pass, yeah, I might not bother reading or going past 3. But if it starts out 5 and I read that and I think I can do this, then I'm going to be more likely to achieve at the higher rate. It also helps you, start out identifying exactly what is it good, whatever work in that category or that criterion looks like. So if you define that in the highest and then slowly subtract from it as you go down the scale to poor performance, it's easier in structure. Some of the other things.
Technical note. That for the same reason, when you start building a rubric in Canvas, it's going to start you at the high end on the left. And if you try to reverse it, the calculations might get screwed up. So do yourself a favor and just work with the default format there.
Yeah, there was a reason behind their madness in doing that. And some other really nice things about using rubrics in Canvas are you can very easily copy rubrics from one area to another. So a lot of things, for example, if you're teaching multiple courses and you have any type of research paper, for example, some of those criteria for what makes a good research paper are going to be the same for all of your assignments or, you know, papers, quizzes, whatever. You can use that rubric and just, you know, easily delete off ones that you don't use or add on and edit, but that way you don't have to keep recreating that wheel. You can also share with other people, which again, so you can think of if there are certain things that in your, you know, area, program, college that are common across all of them, or even if something, for example, maybe you're not an English teacher and English is not your strong suit as far as the grammar, you can contact maybe someone in the English department, maybe they have a rubric. And so there's some sharing that can be done that way as well, where you can import and export quite easily. If you are in an area that is using outcomes, the rubric can incorporate your course or program level outcome, and it will also keep track of that. I'm not going to go into detail on that, but if you're interested in that, please contact me in a separate email and we will reach out to you. It can be a little complicated, but it is a great tool on using the outcomes. But again, rubrics allow you to have that specificity. And one other piece, in case you used Blackboard and didn't like the way rubrics displayed and had your students miss the fact that you graded in a rubric and you took that time to grade it and give feedback, Canvas rubrics actually in the gradebook are much more obvious where the way they show up. It's not that extra clicking behind the scenes where the students kind of had to find that strange icon and look for it. It does show, you know, much more cleanly to the student. It pops up and they can see what exactly it is that you did. And I love the fact even things it does, you know, all the adding. Again, one less thing for me to have to think about. Any questions on the rubrics at all? Just because that's kind of a big topic there. Yeah, the other thing that I really like about using rubrics is that it allows you to do some of these other types of assessment approaches. This is a choice board. And a nice thing about a rubric is if you set that criteria of what lets you know that that student understood and has mastered the content, how they present what they've learned to you, that's part of the universal design for learning, having that multiple pathways and multiple ability to, you know, multiple types of assessment, they can show you in much more creative ways, provided you have that criteria set out. So with the rubric, you can give an assignment like this, and it can still be something that is fairly graded, you know, as far as something that would be across the board easy for you to grade. I've done this in a lot of assignments. Again, going back to chapter readings, things like, you know, the human development chapter and all the different human development theories is one thing that falls into some of my previous teaching. And I've done things where I set the criteria out and they selected any kind of music. And they had to go through and they would pick a song and they had to identify in the song the different characteristics and the different theories of the human development. And I have to tell you, it was absolutely an awesome assignment from what came out of the students and what they went into, just going through the, again, they were picking, I had Eminem, I had country, I had all kinds of music selections. I actually started to like Eminem after that, which was kind of a surprise because his lyrics were a lot more powerful than I ever expected. I had always just written it off, but it opened me. It was a fun to grade, but it was fun for them because they could be who they were, but they still, in order to get the points, they had to document in the textbook, you know, which learning theorist, what page, what language, what terminology. And so again, it just makes learning a little bit more interesting and more realistic than always reading from a text, writing, typing on it, you know, typing in the computer and responding only to your instructor. So if you create that rubric, that's one of those things that allows you to step back, let them be a little bit more creative, but you have still controlled the content and the mastery of that content, which is what you want to do. That is all the slides that I had. Like I said, I kind of went through all of them, so I want to make sure that I went through all of them. But I am more than happy to now answer, specific questions that you have. I'm going to stop sharing about your teaching, or if you want to have us, go into a Canvas course and even poke around anything. Again, this time is for you guys to learn what you're looking for to make your assessments what you want them to be. So I'm just going to open it up for questions. Did I kill you guys with overwhelm? Is that the self-assessment that it was too much? I think I did.
So one thing I was hoping to touch on a little bit, and this might have been another section, was creating effective kind of like exam assessment tools for this current situation that we're in. So for example, in the College of Pharmacy, for a lot of our exams, they're now moving more towards like an open note kind of format. And so do you guys have any good tips on like how to change exam questions or how to write exam questions to make them a little more effective in this new kind of environment that we find ourselves in?
Yes, I think we have a recording of that. Allison Burnoff and I and Julie Rowan, I can't remember if Todd was a part of that one or not. We did a session for a lot of college pharmacy faculty specifically about that, but it is something, you're right, we get a lot of questions about that. Because if you use things like respondus lockdown, that creates other issues, with a lot of people's technology. And so Canvas itself has a lot of different options that are going to allow you. First, I'm going to open on my other screen, I'm going to open a Canvas course here so that we can just go into a quiz and I can show you some of the different options that there are. Let's see, hang on a second while I open that. But then some of the other things that we presented in that is some different ways just to actually structure the quiz question itself. And that's something I'm more than happy to do, a small group or one-on-one, on that, because there's actually things like it's called a question taxonomy, where you're really looking at making sure that the question, just like Bloom's taxonomy with higher level thinking skills, there's a question taxonomy that helps you look at the type of question that you are asking so that it aligns with the type of learning. And there are also different facets with that so that you're scaffolding them in kind of helping, if you scaffold through the different types of questions that you ask, setting it up so that you've identified, did they actually know the answer to the first one? Because the second part is, oh good, Dan's gonna start sharing his, because the second question is depending on some of the thinking, or did they just kind of copy or plagiarize? So that's some of the other things, is just the way that you actually construct the wording of the question and then the order of the question. So I'm gonna, while Dan shares some of the options in here, I will look for this other presentation to see if it's a link that I can share for everyone to have.
Yeah, so Benjamin, this is within a quiz in Canvas. We're just clicking in to edit a quiz. So this, I'm kind of like assuming that you might want to take advantage of this and the automatic grading features. But we've got all these question types available. So depending on the level of thinking, the nature of the course, and that kind of thing, some of these question types might be more appropriate than others. You should be aware, some of them, like the essay in particular, that still requires the instructor to grade it. So we've seen plenty of examples where the whole quiz might be, multiple choice, true, false, that kind of, basic stuff. We've seen some that are One good example I like to mention that I assisted with the last fall was it was an essay exam, but the instructor wanted to set it up in a way that gave the students some choice. So ahead of time, they got about 10 prompts. They had to study for all 10 because they didn't know which ones were going to be on the exam. But when it came time for the exam, they were given 4 of those 10, and then they had to respond to 2. So we did a little finagling to make this tool work for that. And again, that was the essay question type. So it required the instructor to grade them, but it was an interesting way to make sure they were learning everything they needed to know, and the assessment was kind of a subset of that. But some of these have a few quirks associated with them. So if that's something you want to talk more about sometime, let's be sure to do that.
Okay, yeah, thanks for the offer. I sometimes put together some Canvas quizzes, so I'll definitely reach out.
Great. That was the main thing I wanted to mention there, Tracy. But anyone else interested in or any other questions about the quiz option itself?
It looks like Jody in the chat was asking about some specific Canvas question stuff.
Oh, thank you. I need to pull up the chat again. Where did we go? Can you demonstrate a multiple blank or multiple drop down? Yeah, I think that's possible. I wanted to mention too, if you are working with quizzes for the first time, you're often going to get this prompt, classic or new quizzes. At this time, we're still recommending you go with classic because the new engine still has some bugs that they're working out. But it does have some features that the classic does not. So both are in use widely across the university. So if you want to talk about that, that's another choice you can make. Okay, so we're talking about. I already lost it. Multiple blanks or multiple drop downs. Okay, so that kind of question type. Multiple. Okay, fill in the blank is going to give. It's sort of an alternative to multiple choice where you can have several possible answers that they're just choosing one from. So it just, if the question is written in such a way that it kind of lends itself to that, you've got that option. But multiple blanks are going to be, it just kind of switches up the way you write the responses. So this could be, we've got blank 1 and blank 2. Sorry if that's kind of small on your end. So we've got a sentence with 2 blanks in it, and the possible answers that you are providing are just written in a different way. So it's just going to be, oops, I just deleted the whole thing. Okay. So you've got 2 blanks in your prompt, and your answer is going to be something like, dogs, cats. So they're going to be just given the option, and they have to fill in the correct choice. So an alternate might be dogs, birds. To give some variety there.
And this feature is really nice when you're looking for something that more than one thing could be correct. That's one of the ways to use it, because again, that way you can still use the automatic feedback, but it allows them to have, you know, more than one option. And, you know, as silly as it sounds, things like mimicking how they would do it in the real world. The one time that I've helped someone create this type of quiz was with someone who works in the heavy equipment, because when the person actually gets a job as, you know, troubleshooting for heavy equipment, you have to type in, of course, you know, the make, model, and year of a vehicle in order to use the troubleshooting manual. And the troubleshooting manual is incredibly specific. So it is important for them to do it exactly in the format provided. And so we structured the quiz so that it matches the tool that they will be using down the road. It can be kind of a pain to construct the first time, but once you get the pattern of how to do it, then it, you know, again, very straightforward.
The other one you asked about, Jody, was multiple drop-downs, I think. It allows you to, I want to try to show you what that looks like. So
Yes.
I'm actually a cat person, but just for
Oh, that's funny.
so when we go into, we'd have to go into actually the preview, which is similar to the kind of like the student view here. Oh, okay. So I did it wrong, but it's supposed to result in a question prompt that'll have the drop downs embedded right in here. So they'll just click it and select one of the options that you've provided there. So that could be any number of things.
Yeah, what I have done, because these quizzes, when you're doing this kind of quiz the first time around, it's easy to make mistakes like that. And it can get kind of frustrating to have to retype things depending on, you know, how much you're having to play around. I usually, a lot of times on something like that, I will do a short one and I do it in Word or something. So that way I'm just copying and pasting. So if I did it wrong, then I just copy and paste from my Word document when I go back to, you know, try it again to make sure that I've done it properly.
Yeah, Jody, the answer to your final question there is yes. You can always go into the speed grader and review any submission, and it'll show you, you know, what their responses were and whether they were correct or not.
And I did locate, by the way, the question that related to what Benjamin had asked as far as on how to construct the quiz questions. But when I pulled it up, that was part of a 90-minute training. So I will basically select the slides that are relevant to that question, and then I'm going to add that. And I will also, when we send out the recording information and the presentation link, I'll make sure everybody has a copy of that, just because it has some interesting information and some references. Yeah. Thank you, Anne, for joining us. Yeah. And thank you again to everyone. We are right at 3:01, so big cognizance of the time. I am just very glad that all of you are here, and I hope that you have a fabulous start to this semester.